Hello, and welcome to the appendices of The Two Towers. Just like the film itself, we regard this as being the second part of a trilogy, that these documentaries represent an ongoing journey through the making of these films. The Two Towers has definitely been the most difficult of the three movies to make. It was difficult from a point of view of a screenplay. It was the hardest of the books to adapt. The shooting itself was long and arduous. The Battle of Helm's Deep, which was shot during long, wet night shoots, was probably one of the most difficult sequences. We had to deal with the character of Gollum, who we decided was going to be a CGI character, and yet he had to be absolutely believable, and so we had to develop new technologies to do that. And the post-production on The Two Towers was also very difficult. It was a film that we needed to shape and craft in the cutting room more so than the other movies, and we spent so long working on it, I think there were quite a few people that were worried that we weren't going to deliver the film and be able to release it on time. So things got kind of stressful, and you're going to see all that in these documentaries. They're a great way to share with you what it really was to make The Two Towers. Now on this disc there are 5 documentaries which have a running time of just over 3 hours. If you want to watch them individually, you can do that, or if you just want to sit back and let them play without any breaks, then press the play all button. In addition to the documentaries, there's over an hour of extra video material and thousands of stills and production design drawings which you can access through your remote control. And there's the index feature. Now this allows you to find things just as you would using the index of a book. For years we've been making these Lord of the Rings films under very tight security. But the flip side of that are these DVDs, and finally we get to be able to share all this with you. So I really hope you enjoy watching them.
It was very
This was one of the earlier of the Eastling designs. Again, Peter felt that it drew too heavily on existing cultures, which I tend to agree. We're still very much exploring different ways to go with them at this point.
An Easterling. This is another early one. Pete wanted to see something completely different, obviously, from the other humans, i.e. the Gondorians or the Rohan or the Rangers. He wanted a different worldly feel to it, and we started to do things like having the fabric on the outside rather than under the armor, different shaped weapons, the armor being panels of metal or wood even, in certain shapes, which, once again, these small ideas eventuated in the final Easterling.
One of the earliest Easterling designs. In parts of the book, some of the Eastlings are described as being on horseback. I think they're called the Belchoth, and they're rumoured to carry large axes. While the Eastlings we saw in the Two Towers weren't on horseback, some of the early designs reflected the idea that maybe they were. Again, this was too much inspired by existing North African cultures, and we didn't want that sort of look for them, so we didn't want to draw too heavily on any existing cultures, so that ultimately wasn't a way that we went. What we did establish here was that Pete responded very well to the yellowed metal. So, whether it's brass or bronze or whatever, he liked that look. So that was something that we retained as distinctive for the Easterlings. One of the ideas with the Eastlings was that they're amongst the richer of the various armies in Sauron's employ. To that end, we thought it would be interesting and fun to actually design them so they carried a lot of adornment on them, that they carried trinkets that signified their wealth. The more they had on them, the more of a rich and powerful personage they were in their society. This was a drawing to try and suggest that they carry lots of stuff dangling off them. We were still trying to establish the colour palette, trying to establish the overall feel, how much cloth would be on these guys, how much armour, what kind of materials did we have to work with. Peter didn't like the overall turban look. It was too reminiscent of cultures on Earth that we knew from history, and also it wasn't aggressive enough, so we felt we'd go for more of a helmeted look.
The good thing about this Easterling shows the early progression of a colour starting to come in. I think Daniel was the first one actually to start applying the golds and the reds, which eventuated into the last Easterling. But I think they ended up with something that was quite a nice balance, but they still have that sort of Middle Eastern feel to them. I think the crescent moon shape was something that we tried to get rid of or change. Bare chest this time with the Easterling rather than any fabrics. The idea being that they're quite an arrogant race and they're quite happy to bare their heart to their enemies because they know they're never going to get towards their heart. So I think the axe and the weapons are starting to show up where they're quite a different shape from what we've seen before, except for the fact that looking in that one now, it actually looks quite dwarven, the big square one.
This was a second stage Easterling design Peter had responded favourably to in some of Daniel's drawings. So really it was just going for variation on the shape of the lames, the cut of the cloth, and maybe the weaponry they carry. Strong Middle Eastern influence, especially in the helmet, face covered to keep them quite impersonal, and obviously if you come from a sandy region, keeping your face covered is quite important. Short bow, easily carried when moving on foot. It says in the book that they're gold and red colouring, but I put an indigo in there. It's a colour that a lot of desert people use, and I think it's one of the best colours for keeping cool, and put a tracery of gold and red into that, just as a variation really.
Pete really liked the fins that had been drawn on a drawing by Sirisak Champasuth, so I incorporated them into this design. Although ultimately the helmet design was felt to be too science fiction-like, the rest of the design was fairly similar to what we went with. Peter really liked the silhouette, so we kept that.
These illustrations were done as a schematic for the armor makers to build them. Once we got a pretty fair enough lock-off from Pete, if we had the chance, we could actually sculpt a maquette so you get a better shape of it. Or we'd start doing schematic illustrations like this to give Peter an idea of how it looked in 3 dimensions, and then we could follow on to give these illustrations to the armor makers. This one itself didn't actually get made, except I think the actual bowl shape of the head was made, but the cheek guard got changed and the neck armor got replaced. But pretty much the insignia and the detailing was very similar.
Here's a more robust general purpose scabbard where they have these extra little knives. And the reason for it with Faramir is that because he spends a lot of time away from Minas Tirith out in the wilderness, in charge of his rangers, that he would have one of these very general purpose scabbards where you've got your eating knife and your file and stuff right at hand all the time, because you don't always have a camp to go back to maintain your weapon or prepare your food and things. So what we wanted was a robust general purpose scabbard. Unfortunately, we only got to do that for Aragorn's sword.
This is a little Rohan farm showing a dwelling which they probably would have shared with some of the animals, another little barn, an enclosure, a sort of courtyard. Near where I live in Devon, there are some medieval villages, and I really enjoy kind of walking amongst these foundations and getting a sense of the size and spotting the fireplaces and the little pathways. So there's some elements of personal experience in and the look of the thatch roofs and the weighted ropes that would have been used to help to kind of keep them in place during high wind. So this is the kind of house that you might expect to find in a sort of a windswept plain, mainly roof, low walls and gables.
Wicked, tricksy, false. No, master. Yes, precious, false. They will cheat you, hurt you, lie. Master's my friend. You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you. Not listening. Not listening. You're a liar and a thief.
These were done in the first couple of weeks of Gollum ever being started by the design team. So we were just playing with anything, any shapes and sizes and hair and no hair, and playing with face, structure and things like that. Looking at these illustrations now, they're at such an early stage, even in my illustration career or my design career, that they're really, I guess, me just playing around with attitudes rather than anything.
Another quite early Gollum drawing. I did a bunch of them very early on, before we really had established a look for him at all. One of the main points of contention with this one is just that if you don't give Gollum a nose, then he becomes very skeletal. This one has, the little wee skeletal nose, and it makes him very zombie-ish. Pete was quite right in maintaining that we really need to give Gollum a nose, even if it's quite a little wee puckered one, just because the moment you take the nose away, it's not a person anymore, it becomes a zombie-ish looking creature. So he was quite right in that.
A Gollum early illustration, we were trying to think about his locomotion and how he would move through different areas, like, how he'd move across rocks or through things like shingle or up hillsides. And this one was more of an idea that he's moving across a flat land, but he still pretty much climbs along flat land rather than just crawls or walks. He still sticks pretty close to the ground because of the years and years that he's had to keep out of the notice from orcs and out of the notice of people. And I think trying to convey the idea that he does feel desperate, the fact that he hasn't got his ring anymore, he hasn't got his protection, he hasn't got the thing that makes him invincible or makes him completely protected. I think the bulbousness of his fingertips, I suppose, being a development of him moving around the dark and his touch becoming very sensitive, so that could be a follow-on from that idea.
This is actually the first Gollum maquette I ever sculpted. That one was very skeletal, very emaciated, sort of really pushing it. I think I did that in maybe 10 hours or so. I sort of tend to start at a point where I'll almost over-caricature things for a start and then try and pull the elements that I like out of that and then make it feel more realistic as I move on. For a start, I was definitely going for more of something that was a bit more decayed, that sort of had the feeling that it shouldn't really be alive anymore, but somehow it just sort of had kept going. As it evolved, it became more a case that it had to go between these two personalities. So you sort of had to really have it looking far more cute at times, potentially, as more of a Smeagol side of his personality. So you could sympathise with that and then go to the Golem. So it was trying to make something that had the dual balance. And I mean, a face like that probably would have been far too much work as well to actually get expression out of it. It's just so devoid of muscle and so forth. It would just be so skeletal. You ever get the same amount of range that the final character got in the films.
This was a really, really early Gollum sketch. I think we're looking back at about 1998. There hadn't been much done on Gollum at this stage, so it was still very much all up for grabs. It would be one of many drawings on the wall, and, we look at them all as a whole and discuss different elements of them all. You have to show the skinniest options, the most ridiculous options, in order to actually find a happy medium, find something that looks good. Pete really likes us to show him the extreme, so this was on the extreme end of skinny. Likewise, this piece also, by not having a nose, makes it a little bit too zombie-ish. It was the first attempt to try and play around with some colour too. The idea being that he's all green and brown just from living underground and rubbing against rocks and algae on his skin and grass and such like.
A bit later Gollum drawings, still before we'd gone into marketing stage. Sort of refining the face shape more. It's less extreme. It feels a bit more like an old man than a bug-eyed skeleton, perhaps. He's got a real nose. He's a drawn feeling around his mouth. He made the pupils very soft in that one, as if his eyes were almost cataract a bit. So they'd reflect strongly at night, giving the feel of those glowing green eyes that he has, the fact that they're quite opaque. You know, he's got liver spots and just a sad little man, really. Just a sad little man. Another face study for Gollum. Again, trying to keep the face feeling more real than earlier drawings. All the features are derived from features that you'd see on a hobbit or a person, thinned out in places, but still conforming to what we'd recognise as a humanoid, you know, quite a human skull with prominent cheekbones, the set of the jaw and things like that, but obviously distorted in the size of the eyes and just how thin he is. Just another character study. Extreme sort of look at him, more pointed nose, the head's longer from the eyes to the back of the head rather than the top of the head to the chin, which pulls him away from looking orcish and things like that. And for a slinky, sneaky creature, the low profile on that head sort of may have been a way that he's developed over 900 years. The nose is obviously quite big and ugly. It's a less cute look at him, but then inherent problems are, how do you make him look cute, because he needs to. So it has to be an incredibly versatile face, and I don't think that one is. But, you know, again, there's things to look at.
This one was done purely for the design of his costume, trying to show the fact that he used to have some sort of shirt or some other garb that has slowly over the 300 or 400 years come apart, but he's managed to just salvage enough to cover his loins or have enough to keep him warm in the cold parts of winter or down in his hole. And around his wrist you can see the remainder of the sleeve. And he's tied little knots and pieces in his little fiddlings when he's thinking about things.
So this is a very, very, very early Gollum design. We were all just playing around doing different sketches of poses and ideas, trying to nail his character as much as his design and drawings. I mean, obviously with Gollum, he was always tricky, but he was always very clear, I think, in everyone's heads. He was just hard to nail down in the specifics. He was always going to be emaciated. He was always going to have large eyes, and he was always going to be very drawn around the face, and he was always going to have thinning or very thinned long hair. But in the broad strokes, everyone was very clear on what he had to be. But it wasn't always nailing down the specifics. It was the tough part. And again, this is just one of many, many, many drawings that were done over several years trying to zero in on how Peter and Fran wanted Gollum to look.
I think there's actually a fish swimming in the water that I don't think shows up so well I'm not sure if it is, but the idea being that obviously Gollum's out looking for a fish, and he is quite frog-like in his posture and his movement. I think one of the big things for us with Gollum is that so many people had designed Gollum before that we had quite a lot to go on from what the world knew that Gollum looked like. So we were going along those lines more than anything. So once again, it was an attitude and a desire in his eyes more than anything, a crazed look.
Another Gollum study. In this, he probably looks a bit healthier than he does later on in the story. There's a scene from when he's skulking around Lorien, or somewhere like that earlier on, that we see on film, just again finding way into character. Sort of spider-like in a tree, listening, skulking sort of demeanour to him. Again, just finding our way into the character, exploring facial proportions, size of eyes, those sorts of things. Yeah, I imagine he's a lot more limber than we are. Flatten himself down, hide away, and just sneaky, really. Just sneaky. I think you have to draw Gollum eating a fish. you just have to. So there he is eating a fish. Just emaciated, virtually nothing to his abdomen, ribs all showing, but still quite a confident strength about him, which is, I think a nice counterpoint to his physique. There's something really powerful about his personality and his drive, well beyond his physical capability.
Another one for a costume. There's more of the shirt that's available for him to use as a costume, so potentially the pocket could actually be more towards his stomach rather than around his legs, and he's thrown it over his shoulder and tied a knot just to give him a little bit more warmth. These illustrations were done from the final Gollum sculpt. Well, it was supposed to be finaled, but it got changed again, so the actual Gollum character is a bit of a representation of how he was just before he made the changes.
That's another quick early character study that I did. Very scrawny. Peter would come in every day at that stage and just see the progress that we'd been making, and then sort of choose elements and slowly direct it into the sort of final Gollum. We did keep them, but they weren't referenced as such. Sentimentality, really. There's another body study that I did before actually undertaking the life-size one. Each of these body studies was done at about the size we imagined him to be, between 3 and 4 foot tall, just to get a proportionate feel for it. When you stood alongside it, it just sort of helped understand what felt natural. Peter had sort of specified that he wanted him to feel quite wrinkled. That's why just at the top of his kneecaps there as well, you can sort of see the slack sort of skin. Well, that was the thing, to make him feel like very, very, very old, but at the same time very lean and wiry. I used Iggy Pop as a reference for that. It was definitely very handy. Just being thin-skinned and very taut, muscular, and great inspiration. Ah, wow. Yeah, this was an early body study that I did before we'd sculpted the full-size body, just purely to play around with the attitude of the body and what sort of positions it may sort of contort into and get a feel for it. And there's no head on this because we're still playing around with an idea for a head, but it was pretty much close to the finalised body in a lot of ways.
Ooh, look at that!
Welcome to the sun-drenched tropical paradise of Isle Delfino. We're so pleased to welcome you to our beautiful home. Come enjoy a natural wonderland to which we've added the world's finest resort facilities, a spectacular amusement park, and succulent seafood. All this and more await you on Isle Delfino. Come relax and let us refresh your body and spirit.
Super Mario Sunshine! Woohoo! Here we go. Whoa. Whee!